My name is Erin Stavanis, and I use the pronouns she and her. And I'm really excited to be able to come to this space and lead us through a design activity. I'm working with the PCEF team on some of the design sprint work that they are providing in order to make sure that the ideas generated by community keep community centered. And I'm really excited to be able to share a few of those design tools and practices and frameworks really today. We'll preview some of those today. I'll chat at you for just a few minutes, and then we'll be doing a lot of hands-on activities. So if you aren't in a place where you feel comfortable, you may want to transition to where you have a little bit of workspace. The next portion of the workshop and the remainder of the portion of the remainder of the workshop rather will be pretty interactive. We'll be I'll be guiding you through some activities that you can be using to kind of frame the project or the ideas that you have. And then we'll be doing some breakouts towards the very end. But I do want to pause before we jump straight into the activity by way of transition to return to the question we asked at the very beginning. As a check-in, if you did miss it, we had the opportunity to just introduce ourselves in the chat and put your name, your pronoun, where you're from, and what you think of when you hear the word design. If you didn't get a chance to do that, definitely feel free to do so. I was keeping an eye on some of the concepts that came in and saw a broad range of things. I saw someone say creativity. I saw someone say something new or interesting, creating beautiful things. But then other people had some practical examples like plans, other things like that, planning, etc. And I think it's important because we're going to be using the term design a lot today to just think of what does it mean, like what comes to mind. We may be familiar with design in products that we see, things that we interact with, we may think of as design. I think someone said logos or branding. So we think of like marketing, maybe. We know that visuals are designed. Maybe we think of buildings, there's built design. You might be a trained designer, a designer by trade with a capital D, maybe a graphic designer or an architect. So we see things in the built environment. There's items, objects that we interact with in everyday life that are clearly designed. But I believe that design is more broad. And today we'll be exploring the broadly conceived terminology of design. I believe that we can see design, if we look closely enough, in systems, in institutions, in organizations, in policies, programs, and even the social environments that we're in are products of design. And that these rich, layered, complex systems that we live, work, and play in, it's worth asking, why were they designed? How were they designed? And for whom were they designed? And I believe that we can begin to examine these systems. When we begin to examine these systems through the lens of design, we might start to notice things that we didn't before. We might begin to notice that things aren't working for everyone equally, that there's consequences to design, the choices that we make, whether those are intended or not. And so I've found that it's helpful, and for today, I'm just asking you to try on this definition of design as thoughtful consideration. If we use design as thoughtful consideration, if we approach design as thoughtful consideration, how can we expand the scope of what gets to be designed, how we design, and who gets to design? And I think that when we expand the scope of design, we all of a sudden have this rich opportunity to come to redesign together. That people who might not traditionally think of themselves as designers with a capital D might be designers with a small lowercase d. And I think that we have a lot of challenges ahead, social, environmental, climate justice related. And I think that we can use design as a tool, that we can leverage redesign in order to remake these systems around us so that they work for more people, for us in the community, and for people that we intend to serve. And so today we'll be talking about, we'll really be focused on two types of design activities, but they're both what I would consider discovery activities, which is an important part of the design process. In fact, I would argue that most design processes, if they aren't beginning in discovery, that they might be beginning a bit too early, or too late rather, and that there's a rich discovery that can happen that can inform thoughtful consideration or design. So today we'll be putting into practice two practical tools actually that you can use to consider your projects, your ideas, your organizations, your businesses even. And I'm excited to share them. So if you haven't already, definitely get in a place where you feel comfortable kind of working, if that's like sitting at a table. I do ask that you grab 2 pieces of paper, maybe up to 3 to 4, maybe it's a journal, something that you can write on that is of maybe a larger surface, not just like a small Post-it. So take a minute to grab what you need in order to really sit down and work through some of these tools together. We'll be prepping what I call a design canvas, which is just simply we'll be prepping a piece of paper so that you can do some reflection and writing on it, some brainstorming together. But you will need blank sheets of paper and something to write with. So I'll chat for a little bit about our first activity while you get set up. So, and if you can just signal either, if you have your video on, you can kind of give me a visual thumbs up, or you can use kind of one of the reactions. I'll want to know if we have a majority of folks ready to move on with their piece of paper and something to write with. That would be awesome. Yay, thanks, Mark. I see your thumbs up. Ari, I see your notebook. Thanks, Maria. I see you. Chris, thank you. Amelia, Alicia, thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Hi, Carol. Thanks for, nice to see you. Great. Thanks, Matt. And I see your chat. Awesome. Okay, cool. So you can keep grabbing if you're, I need paper. That's okay. But I want to introduce the first activity. So the first activity we're going to just jump right into is called empathy mapping. Now, this is, again, a discovery tool. It's often used very early on in the design process, or one of the first kind of sets of things to do. It's a really good way to understand and identify kind of your current state understanding of what you know about the people you wish to serve. In this case, it's a really great design activity that could be used to identify current understanding of a PCEF priority community for your project or idea. We'll also be using it as a way to almost gauge, take kind of a temperature check, so to speak, to see where there might be opportunities to even understand and learn more. So we're gonna do this mapping tool together. If you find that you aren't sure how to answer the question, that's like a great thing. That means that that might be an opportunity for further learning. So it is totally fine if you're not quite sure how to answer all the prompts, but I do want to give you the prompts and some space, some spaciousness to respond to them. So on your first sheet of paper, blank sheet of paper, just draw 4 equal squares. You can take up the whole sheet, as much room as you want. 4 equal squares that look kind of like this, you can number them. That would be an easy way for us to keep track of where we are in the activity. And as you do so, think, who is this set of people, or maybe a singular person, a persona, if you're used to using those terms, a representation of the type of people, stakeholders or beneficiaries that your project serves. So who are you, who's your who for this idea and for this project? So take a minute to think about that and set up the canvas for the empathy map, the 4 squares. If you're not quite sure of your who, that's okay as well. But I do ask that you choose one type of group of people, the main priority, customer, consumer, target audience, stakeholder, that your project is attempting to serve in its as it's designed today, the reason why it was created. And you can be as generic or as specific as possible for the purposes of this exercise. Either will work. The more specific, the easier it might be. But when you have that person and when you have your canvas prepped, again, a quick thumbs up or ready in the chat would be awesome. Okay, cool. All right, so over the next couple minutes, I'm going to give you a prompt, 4 prompts actually. We'll do this as kind of in a free flow manner. So I'll kind of give a prompt for square 1, I'll give a prompt for square 2, 3, and 4, and I'll give you time to work through them. I'll be moving us through these prompts in like a timed fashion. Just know that it might feel quick, it might feel like not enough time or too much time, but just know for the sake of time, I'm gonna move us through the canvas. We'll have the prompts up on the screen, and I'll invite you to move to the next square after like 2 minutes of time in each square for you to kind of think and reflect on the question. And so this will take about 8 to 10 minutes or so, and then we'll check in. If you aren't ready to move on to the square, that's totally fine. You don't have to, it's an invitation, but just know we will be moving on. So you might want to just kind of keep track of your own time as well and keep up with the prompts if that feels comfortable. So starting in square 1, write the word do. So for the first part of the empathy map, we're going to consider what your stakeholder is doing. Literally, what is that person that you identified, the group of people that you identified, what are they actually doing with their time? What are their responsibilities? What are they physically doing? So I'll give us about 2 minutes to brainstorm. You can also draw a picture or a list or mind map in your square around what your stakeholder is doing. So I invite you to move on to the second square of your canvas and write the word say, and to consider, what is your stakeholder saying? What have you heard them say? What might you assume that they're saying? If you know your stakeholder well, you can even put quotes, like what do you remember having heard from the mouth of the person, group, people, community your project aims to serve? What are they saying? So again, about 2 minutes for square 2. Okay. So wrap up your thoughts for square two. You can come back to them, but I do want to describe the third prompt. So the third invitation is on the third square three of your canvas to write the words think and feel and to consider what your stakeholder is thinking and feeling. So this could be similar to what they might be saying, but what might be the internal thoughts behind what they are saying? What might they be feeling because of what they are saying? And then again, if you know your stakeholder well, what might be their dreams or ideas for the future? What are they thinking and feeling? Can we capture some of the emotional state of your stakeholder in square three? Okay, so we're on our fourth square, and I invite you to write the words see and hear and to take that space to consider what your stakeholder is seeing and hearing. I apologize, I should say hearing. So, what is your stakeholder currently hearing or seeing that is important to them? What are they hearing or what are they seeing? Maybe about who they are, maybe about stories about themselves. What are they hearing or what are they seeing? Okay, go ahead and wrap up your last thought. And I've enjoyed looking at the gallery because I see a lot of heads down. It's like heads down work. So kind of take a moment to pick your head up, look at the canvas that you just filled in with your thoughts, your questions, maybe words, drawings, lines, ideas, and take a moment to reflect. I invite you to maybe annotate, meaning maybe you want to circle, star, underline, bold, highlight things that you notice, but you can take it just a couple minutes to reread what you wrote, your brainstorms. And as you reread, think about, what do you notice from your brainstorms? What surprises you? And maybe it's what's not there and why. And yes, I'll go ahead and put in the chat even the 4 prompts so that you have them. But about a minute and a half left or so to reflect and reread your brainstorm. Okay, so go ahead and set that canvas aside closely, keep it close. And we're actually going to do another round of empathy mapping, but with slightly different prompts. So prepare the same canvas, same four square setup for your grid, and same actual stakeholder group as well. The prompts will just be slightly different. One of the opportunities we have with design is to kind of be expansive in our thoughts, and then we can come in and be a little bit more constrained. I would say that the first empathy map round we did was pretty general. We're now going to do another version, another round of the empathy map, very similar prompts, but slightly more focused. And we'll be spending similar time in each. So go ahead and get your grid set up, and we'll jump straight in. So for that first square, the same prompt, so do is the same prompt, but slightly different points to think about. Consider what your stakeholder is doing in relation to the impacts and effects of climate change. How is your stakeholder responding? How are they meeting the opportunities or challenges that might be presented to enhance or support their well-being? So specifically, what is your stakeholder doing in relationship to climate change and its impacts on them? For square two, it's the same main prompt. What is your stakeholder saying? But more specifically, focusing in, what is your stakeholder saying in relation to the impacts and effects of climate change? What are they saying related to the way that that might affect or enhance or create opportunities or challenges to their well-being? What is your stakeholder saying in relation to climate change? And for our third square, perhaps you can predict what we might be writing, but write, think, and feel at the top, but more focused than generally what are people thinking or feeling. Think through the lens of what is your stakeholder? What might they be thinking in relation to the impacts of climate change on their community? What might they be feeling? What is that emotional state of your stakeholder in regards specifically to the impacts of climate change? All right. And so on our last square of our second canvas, write the words see and hear and consider what your stakeholder is seeing and hearing. Again, this time in relation to climate change and its impacts. What information or stories are being told about climate change or its impacts? What information might be being shared? What is your stakeholder seeing or hearing specifically about climate change and its impacts on them or their community? In our last 3 to 4 minutes, um, congratulations, you just finished 2 rounds of empathy mapping, a lot of kind of quiet reflection time. Take a look at the two canvases that you produced, the two maps that you produced, and take a pause and reflect on how that went. You may want to reread your brainstorms and annotate your second canvas, but take a moment to check in. How did that feel even for you to complete those exercises? What do you notice about them? What you were able to produce, maybe how you felt during them, what surprises you. So just take a few minutes, reread your two canvases, maybe circling, maybe annotating. the activity that we just did was empathy mapping. And I did ask for you to kind of use your maps and canvases to identify an area of opportunity that you would be interested in learning more about. So a pretty broad invitation. If you haven't done that, definitely feel free to take a look at your canvases and be like, this is an area that maybe I should or could or might be able to learn more about, discover more. So we are going to jump into our second design activity. It is still within the realm of, I would say, discovery. We're going to be doing a couple different brainstorms to help us facilitate and come up with new ways we could do discovery around this area of opportunity. Discovery, and then what we'll be talking about later in the last part of the remaining hour, is listening opportunities as well. So discovery and listening brainstorm activities, these can be used to identify resources that you have readily available to you to learn more. And then we're going to have a chance to brainstorm some questions that you could use if you choose to do what we call a listening session. So stick around for that. So let's get started. All right, so hopefully you have that third sheet of paper where we're using another piece of paper, and I think we might even use one or two more. So third sheet of blank paper, and to prepare this canvas, simply just draw 4 columns. You can turn your paper like, I don't know, horizontally, so you have more space. You can label them A, B, C, and D. So we're going to be working through some prompts very similar to last time, but this is a discovery brainstorming canvas that you're preparing. Considering your findings from activity 1, hopefully you have an area or opportunity that you may be interested in digging in a little bit more and learning about. You may want to write that area of opportunity on your canvas as well. So you're kind of really, again, we're focusing in even further based on your work. When you have your canvas ready, when you have your area of opportunity from activity 1, go ahead and pop another thumbs up or reaction or ready in the chat. See a couple readies. David, Maria, thank you. Carol, saw that. Chris, I see you. Liz, thank you. Helen, Amelia, thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. All right. I think most of the people on my first gallery of Zoom have responded in some way. So let's get started. All right. So in column A, we are going to be brainstorming. And in this case, you may want to simply list things, words, ideas, etc. But within that first column A, the invitation is to brainstorm a list of experiences, skills, or relationships. So lots of different things that you could brainstorm there that could be useful to better understand the area of opportunity for your project or idea. So column A is experiences, skills, or relationships, things that you might be able to better understand your opportunity of your area of opportunity. About 2 minutes. Okay, so moving on to column B. Column B provides a prompt, an opportunity to brainstorm a list of industries, services, or sectors that could provide further clarity about this area of opportunity for your project or idea in relation to your empathy map. So, industries, services, or sectors that are related or could provide insight into your area of opportunity. Okay. And keep in mind, these are areas, brainstorms to help support further discovery. So for column C, the invitation is to brainstorm people you could speak to or places that you could visit or even observe. People that you'd speak to or maybe shadow, or places where you could visit or observe and just learn more. People or places related to the area of opportunity that you identified. Who could you speak to? Where could you go? Okay, go ahead and wrap up that third brainstorm. And in the fourth column, the invitation is to brainstorm a list of analogous research areas that could provide inspiration. Now, hold up, let me explain what analogous research means. Analogous research is simply a term that's used often in kind of this design sprint process, and it refers to a type of exploration that intentionally looks outside of the most immediate application, the most immediate like scope in order to be inspired. So, for example, if you're trying to come up with ways to create deeper connections with mentors or mentees, or maybe that was like something that you wanted to explore, maybe you could think, what's an analogous relationship to a mentor and mentee? Maybe you had a great experience in like summer camps. So you're like, maybe I should go to like a camp situation and observe or talk to someone about how that relationship is formed between, camper, counselor, etc. So again, analogous research allows you to draw some analogies. So brainstorm a list of analogous research areas that could help provide inspiration that's intentionally outside the most immediate area of opportunity, but is related. Okay, so go ahead and wrap up your last brainstorm. And just like before, let's take a moment to pause and reflect. Feel free to annotate your columns, your brainstorms, reread your four columns and lists that you produced, and consider, what's sticking out to you. What do you notice? What surprises you? So 1 minute to reflect or annotate your lists. Okay. So hopefully you've had a chance to consider the lists that you brainstormed. And I want to invite you into even a deeper reflection for just two questions. So if you filled up your piece of paper, I do invite you to use either the back or a separate piece of paper, maybe the back of one of those empathy maps that you did before. So on a final sheet of paper, I will invite you to engage in a free writing response. So there's two prompts, and the invitation to free writing refers to a writing practice that invites you to write kind of a brain dump of what what you would say in response to this. Try not to edit. Try to write the whole time if you can. That's the invitation. And there's just two questions. And we'll spend about 90 seconds for each one, so not too long. So the first free write prompt. So again, I would invite you to write. Based on the activities above, specifically the discovery mapping, whose story do you want to listen to? So when you look at your discovery map, the ones that we just did, the columns, whose story do you want to listen to? Whose story will will help you better understand the current situation? Whose story might provide inspiration or information? So about 90 seconds to free write in response to this prompt. Okay, so that was 90 seconds. And I want to give us one more prompt, a free writing prompt. Similar, but based on the activities above, whose story do you need to listen to? Something to consider is, how has your personal identity, maybe your experience or your privilege, informed who you might be seeing in this process, or even the opportunities that you were able to brainstorm? Whose story do you need to listen to? Whose story remains untold? So 90 seconds to respond to that prompt. So we have a couple more activities, but we're going to do a little bit of a transition into our next activity. And hopefully those reflections revealed um, something about the story that you both want to listen to, or maybe a story that you feel like you need to listen to. Um, and I love discovery in the design process because it gives us an excuse to listen to stories. I believe one of the best ways to kind of understand about potential opportunities as we consider either designing or even redesigning systems, tools, products, programs, etc., is through understanding uh, what's needed. Uh, and the best way to understand what's needed is to listen to needs. And one of the methods of listening is literally a listening session. You can think of it kind of like an interview, but interview implies that you might be asking or talking a lot more, I think, than what a listening session implies, which is that you're trying to listen to someone's story. So we will be offering another workshop in about a month. And during that time, I invite you to conduct a listening session. Think of who you identified in the last two free writes. Consider who you could reach out to and listen to their story. You have time between now and the next, workshop that we're holding in June. And ask them if they have time to meet with you for an informal, you can even call it a listening session. Listening sessions are really focused on listening to someone's story or experience, their firsthand story or experience. It could be done based, whatever method is comfortable for folks, the person that you're listening to. Maybe that's phone, maybe that's Zoom, maybe it can be safely done outside in person, based on your comfort and their availability. They're usually pretty brief. They're not even a full hour. The conversation maybe can go that long, but just to be mindful of people's time, you can ask really rich questions and even 15 minutes. Often these listening sessions are done in design, sometimes like randomly outside. So you're doing this a little bit more targeted, like you might be asking someone intentionally, but think of these as even informal. And 15, 25 minutes is usually sufficient. A note that we have here on the slide that is important is, consider the power dynamics that you might be bringing, and that might be operating during something like a listening session, and consider providing, compensation or recognition in recognition of people's contributions. And that's especially, I think, relevant if you are representing an official organization. So keep that in mind. But with that being said, we have a couple tips for listening sessions. And I would just, I'll pass it off to Jay, who's going to help us walk through some of these listening session tips.
Thanks, Erin. I'm just going to read some tips to ensure that your listening sessions are fruitful. Number one is be human. How are you doing today? And actually listen to what they have to say. Build trust. Offer something of yourself. Be affirming. Tell me about, tell me about your experience. How do you use? What do you think about? Seek stories. What was your best / worst / most memorable experience with the area of focus? What do you remember about that day, process, time, project, experience? Could you tell a story about a time when something happened, you tried to do something and it didn't go well? What would I find surprising about experience, project, etc.? Next slide, please. Talk about feelings. Walk me through how you felt. What were you thinking? Why did you say that? Tell me more. How did you feel in the moment when something happened to you or you witnessed something? Could you tell me why that's important to you? What emotions do you have about that? And with that, I'll pass it back to Erin.
Thank you so much, Jay. So again, those are just a few quick tips to keep in mind for a listening session. I do see a question in the chat, and I'll raise it because I think it might be on other people's minds. So Ari asks, how would you weigh the choice based on limited resources of doing broader slash shallower outreach versus deeper listening sessions with fewer people? I think that's a great question. I would answer, maybe not, maybe predictably, that depends on where you are in a design process and also what information you're seeking. I wouldn't necessarily categorize that broader outreach is necessarily shallower. I do think listening sessions are deep, but I do think that depending on whether you're trying to kind of validate assumptions or generate more ideas, one might be appropriate for the other. I think if you take a look at your empathy maps, for example, if it was really difficult to identify areas and you're like, I'm not sure what people are saying, I think that might reveal the opportunity for deeper listening, because even finding a couple experiential firsthand anecdotes and stories from people might really change your perspective of where you are at and or how you can approach a process or program that you're designing. Versus if you were kind of in a different stage in the design process, I think doing broader outreach is entirely appropriate, but of course has slightly different outcomes. So I hope that's helpful. Just a little bit more information of how to contextualize when to do what. The great question. One of our final activities for today is to really kind of put into practice this opportunity to prep for a listening session. So let's just, I will assume that everyone's ready to schedule a listening session and super excited, but you might be wondering, well, what do I say? Based on those tips that were in the prior slide that Jay was reading, I would love for us to spend a little bit of time to draft some questions so that you can walk out with a tangible list of things that you might be able to ask people who you might be inviting to a listening session, maybe just one person, and that's great. So on a sheet of paper, it can be the back of that last reflection or any extra paper that you have around. Take a few minutes to literally just draft in kind of like Mad Lib form. If you all know what Mad Libs are, it's like you fill in the blank of a sentence, kind of almost like Mad Lib fashion. You know, use this start of a sentence, but finish the end. So you can write out, tell me about, and then ... fill in your blank. What was your best or worst or most memorable experience with? And you write in your area of focus. And then thirdly, could you tell me a story about a time when ... and you finish the sentence? Or what would I find surprising about ... So I'll give us about 2 minutes or so to just draft 2 or 3 questions based on these templates for questions. So hopefully you have at least one or two draft questions that you might be able to bring into a listening session if you choose to take that opportunity over the next couple weeks. And as we kind of come to a close, we are going to give you a chance to reflect and kind of check in smaller groups. But to do so, I want to just have us do one more quick individual reflection and pause. As we go into the small groups, I just want to honor that not everyone might feel comfortable sharing. Well, one, you won't have time to share everything that you actually did, like produced. So instead, I would just invite you to bring something from this reflection into your small group, which is, what did you notice about these design activities? We just went through a lot. We did a couple empathy maps, some discovery, brainstorming, several different free writing, and some question crafting. What did you notice about the design activities? What surprised you and why? So I'll give you about 60 seconds to prepare, and know that we are going to be asking you and inviting you into these small group reflections before we do a larger group wrap up. So about 60 seconds to take a look at all the stuff you've done. What did you notice? What surprised you? And why?